Okay, good evening. We're going to get started. It's 7 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Joanna Ford. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services in District 109 and thrilled to have Dr. Doug Bolton with us again. I think this is number 3, workshop 3 in our Spring Parent Guardian series. So we're going to let Doug jump right into the topic and get started. And if you want to add a question or a comment, you should be able to use the Q&A feature on the webinar, and then we will certainly, I'll either, if there's a time, work it in and stop Doug as he's speaking. If not, you can ask it at the end. So looking forward to getting started. Doug, I'll hand it right off to you.
All right. It's great to be back. This has been a lot of fun, and thank you, Joanna, for organizing all of this. As I got started, I wish I had a better title for this. And so the title I would have used is 3 myths that undermine our parenting. So I hope this will still fit. I think these are the things that make us most anxious. So I hope I don't disappoint you with the content, but this is a talk that I've wanted to pull together for a long time. And so I'm grateful to be able to do this with all of you today. What I want to do is start to kind of uncover some of these myths and take a closer look at some of these myths that I think can drive a lot of our parenting. You know, one thing that I think that in our own, I'm not saying that we have all thought specifically about this, but at some level, especially on the North Shore, we have this idea that there's one path to happiness and health for our kids, and it's our job to keep them on that path. And it goes something like this. We move and we get into a high achieving school system like District 109. We fill them with extracurriculars, we get them into a selective college, and we get them into a high-paying job. And that's the path we hope for our kids. And so I guess I want to break this down a little bit. And it was interesting. I did I was meeting with a junior in high school, and she said this almost verbatim. She said, you know, everything I've been doing for my whole life has been to work to find, to be able to make enough money, which means I need to have a really good job, which means I need to go to an elite college, which means I've got to fill my life with AP classes. I think she's taking 5 or 6 AP classes. But in order to get to those, I've got to excel in lower grades. And of course, in order to get to be primed to achieve in our lower grades, we've got to get them into a high achieving elite preschool. And before preschool, we've got to fill them with all sorts of early enrichment activities to get that brain developing so they can get the language they need, so that they can be able to get their, be ready to be fully reading by the time they hit kindergarten. And, you know, we talked about last time I spoke about development, we talked about how we keep track of all these milestones. And it's almost like we are creating our child's resume, isn't it? We're like creating a resume for them to be able to make this path successful. I can still remember, for me, I know that this is outdated, but that's how old I am, is we had baby Einstein. I don't think baby Einstein's around anymore. In fact, I think the science was debunked several years ago. But we had baby Einstein going, right? And then in Evanston, we have Cherry Preschool, and that's the preschool that kids would need to go to. And then, you know, my kids were not all that talented athletically or musically or anything. So I didn't have this. But what we do know is we get these kids on as many travel teams as we can, right? Many kids, many families out here have kids playing 2 and 3 sports a season. And in order to do that, we've got to get them the right training. And so they get their training, and they get, and they're on all of their teams. And then when they hit college, how many AP classes do they need to take? I can remember both of my kids talking about this pressure they felt to take all of these AP classes. And then we get them into all of these study classes so they can get their ACT and their SAT scores up. And then some parents take it too far, right? What we know, but there's this investment that the college admission scandal really revealed. That may be the outlier, but certainly we all felt this same kind of pressure to make sure that our kid got into a selective college. And so it's interesting is, you know, I was noticing when my kids were younger, and like I said, I did not have highly talented kids, which meant my life was pretty quiet. We didn't have travel teams and we didn't have concerts to go to. But what would happen at almost every time we'd meet new people is they'd say, what do your kids do? Almost like they were supposed to be working. And I can still remember the shame that I felt when I'm like, yeah, well, he's just really a nice kid. He loves his, he just loves playing in the backyard, as other people were talking about, their travel teams and the all-star teams and the amazing concerts and violin work that their kids were doing. And then as my kids got older, my kids are both now. There was all this, where's your college? Is that place? And everybody was expecting, high achieving schools. And so I want to hit these three myths because I think that many of us, I hope that this resonates with you. But here are the myths. The myths are that money makes us happy. The second myth is that elite colleges are the key to success. And the third myth is that self-esteem is essential for wellness. So let's break these down. So myth number one is money makes us happy. And I think there's this happiness conspiracy. The data does not support this whatsoever. And yet we all are a part of this, that there's this belief that if we make enough money, we're going to be happy. But they actually have done a lot of research on this for years. And some of the most consistent research is that after our basic needs are met, this was from 2011, about $75,000 a year for a family of four. Once our basic needs are met, our levels of happiness really plateau. My guess is that's probably closer to 80, between 80 and 85,000 now. But what they say, and this is fascinating to me when I heard it, is that on our daily measures of happiness, how happy are you today, or how happy are you in this moment? If you make $75,000, $750,000, $7.5 million a year, those levels of happiness all show up the same. Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize laureate, is actually one of the people. He and Angus Deaton came up with this research that says, once you get past the basic needs, we all end up plateauing in our happiness. So this is how they measured it. So this is the actual data. The red line is you experienced happiness or enjoyment in the last day. Did you experience happiness, enjoyment, smiling, laughter yesterday? Did you not experience worry or sadness yesterday? And did you not feel stressed out? So what you can see is once the stresses of income dissipate, it really plateaus and levels off. What they say is that $75,000 is a threshold beyond which further increases in income no longer improve an individual's ability to do what matters most to their emotional well-being, such as, and these are the key things, spending time with people they like, avoiding pain and disease, and enjoying leisure. The leisure looks different, right? Maybe you're not going to Cabo, maybe you're camping in the Kettle Moraine, but whatever that looks like, you're finding your way of finding leisure. So these guys took over a study called the Grant Study. This is another fascinating bit of research that helps us understand and unpack this. What these guys did, they took over a study that actually started in 1938 with hundreds and hundreds of young men, both Harvard graduates, but also they had a cohort of people who were also from inner city Boston. So they had the white and wealthy kids, and then they had the folks from inner city Boston. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to follow these people to see what makes their lives healthy, what makes them happy. And they started following them in 1938, and they are still following the ones who are alive. And now they're starting to follow their kids. They have got, this is a longitudinal study like never before. And so they've got all of this data. They interviewed them. They do CAT scans and all sorts of scans on them. They take blood, they measured everything, and they tracked their lives. And so here's how they describe what we've done since 1938 is study the big domains of human life: of human thriving. So mental health, physical health, work-life relationships. And so the study is about what helps people have flourishing lives and what unfortunately gets people into situations where they don't flourish. So what do we have? 80 years of data. And here's what they found. The strongest predictor for people to maintain their happiness and health throughout the course of their lives was having relationships with satisfying levels of quality and warmth. It wasn't money. And they continue to find that throughout this. George Valiant, he ran the study before these guys took it over. He ran it for like 30 years. I don't know, from 1960 to 1990 or 1970 to 2000, something like that. He said the 75 years and $20 million expended on the grant study points to a straightforward 5-word conclusion. Happiness is love, full stop. It's not about our money. The reality is that relationships make us happy. But I want to get at the second part of this myth, which is we need a prestigious job, right? That's important. And here's the grant study again. Finding work that you love, finding work you find meaningful really is a driver of well-being and happiness. The people who are more engaged in their work and feel their work is more rewarding are the people who have at least one close friend at work. So all of a sudden, the work has to be a place of belonging and a place of meaning. Nowhere are they mentioning salary or income. Daniel Pink in his book Drive really dives into this. What is it that helps people feel engaged and happy at work? What motivates them? And what he says is it's a feeling of autonomy, that the job has to have a sense of purpose and mastery. We need to be learning and continuing to grow, that these are the pieces, not income, that make work meaningful. So this is what he says. Autonomy is about feeling in control, not being micromanaged, feeling like I can make my own decisions. Mastery is feeling like I'm using my full potential and growing. And purpose, feel like our work matters and makes an impact. So the reality is we're healthier and happier when we find meaningful work in healthy and connected work environments. Again, it debunks the idea that it has to be a powerful job. It debunks the idea that it has to be a job with a high income. All right, myth number 2, selective schools are better for our kids. Man, is this a part of our society? And I think this is relatively new, to be honest with you, within the last couple generations. And I think it probably started this belief that college, an elite school, is a ticket to our success with the US News and World Report rankings, which really began in 1985. And then all of a sudden, we believed that we created some level of scarcity, that everybody needed to go to the best college once we began ranking them. But and I won't get into this, but those rankings have been debunked in so many different ways as far as their validity and their reliability, all of those things. But what we do believe is that we can push the meter on our children's success and happiness if we can get them into a highly selective college. The interesting thing about a highly selective college is that these colleges define themselves based on the number of people they don't let in. Isn't that interesting for these communities where you're trying to create a sense of belonging? Anyways, it's not just us that believe this, it's our kids that believe this, it's our teachers that believe this. This is all a part of this grand conspiracy that actually doesn't have any research base to it whatsoever, either what the rankings say, but also what the data says about the impact of these highly selective schools. I like this book. If you're curious about this some more, Frank Bruni wrote a great book, Where You Go is Not Who You'll Be. He says a yes or no from Amherst or Dartmouth or Duke or Northwestern is seen as conclusive measure of a young person's worth, a binding verdict on the life that he or she has led up until that point, an incontestable harbinger of the successes or disappointments to come. This is, if we get into the highly selective college, the college of our dreams, our lives will take off, right? And the opposite is also true. If we don't get in, somehow it's disastrous for us. So let's take a look. If that's true, then we'd expect the CEOs, the most successful businessmen in our world to be in these high achieving schools, right? Let's take a look. This is from 1914. The CEOs from the top grossing of the top 10 grossing revenues in 2014. Look at all these state universities: University of Arkansas, Texas, California, Davis, not Berkeley, Davis, University of Nebraska, Auburn, Texas A&M, Kettering, University of Kansas. Oh, there's finally an Ivy in here. We got a Dartmouth in there. University of Missouri, St. Louis. Look at that. There's no Stanford, there's no Northwestern, there's no Penn, right? None of these. Okay, let's take a look at some of the schools that gave out MacArthur Genius Grants right in our own backyard. Is it Northwestern? I'm sure Northwestern and the University of Chicago have theirs, but take a look. So does Western Michigan. So does Western Illinois, Illinois Wesleyan, Southern Illinois. They all produced MacArthur Genius Grants. Let's take a look at the Platinum Study, which took a look at 550 leaders in business, government, nonprofits, and politics, right? So let's see where they're coming from. 2/3 of them came from non-elite institutions. Guess how many elite institutions there are? 200. 200 elite institutions. I couldn't even name half of the ones that are considered elite. 2/3 came from schools that weren't elite. This idea that we need to go to a highly selective elite school in order to be successful sure doesn't seem to play out in these statistics. How about Fortune 500 CEOs? How many went to an Ivy League and how many never went to college? 7% went to Ivy League, 8 got no diploma. So here's the thing. Not just does it not show up in the ways we expect, that it's not this ticket to success in the way that we might expect it to, but we also have to be careful. Sean Aker, who is a Harvard professor, he does a lot of work on happiness. He talked about when he was a professor at Harvard and he had freshman classes, and he'd walk in the first class, he would say to them, hey, half of you now, for the first time in your lives, instead of being in the top 1 or 2% of your class, you're now in the bottom 50%. What does that feel like? All of a sudden, we've got kids who have been identified themselves around their ability to achieve and be the very best, who all of a sudden, as we know, half of them have to be below average, at least 49% have to be below average. And here's what Malcolm Gladwell talks about. There's this wonderful research. One of the things that happens is that when we go to a school that's highly selective, that has high expectations, they begin to weed people out. And what he found in the research he cites, he said people in the bottom third of any college or university were over 3 times more likely to drop out of STEM classes, whether it be any of the sciences or mathematics classes, any of these highly competitive disciplines. He talks about a person who, instead of going to Harvard, went to the University of Maryland. At Harvard, the student probably would have not have been able to go on to become pre-med because she wouldn't have been able to be in the top third or whatever their cutoff is at Harvard. But at the University of Maryland, she got mentoring. She was a star in her class. She was able to get into a highly prestigious, I don't remember what it was, but I think it was Johns Hopkins. She got into Johns Hopkins as a medical student, whereas if she was at Harvard or Yale, she probably would not have even made it to organic chemistry. So all that being said, they get a better quality of education, don't they, at these high achieving schools? Here's what the data says. There's little evidence, and they looked at all this data over several years. Little evidence suggests that selectivity is related to measures of students' self-reported gains in learning, let alone verbal, quantitative, or subject matter competence measured by standardized tests. The weight of the evidence simply does not support students' or policymakers' belief that a selective admissions process enhances student learning. They don't learn anymore. So what does, if it's not how selective the school is, what does impact student learning? Well, this is going to shock you. The time they spend studying. whoever did that research, right? Aram and Roska, this is what they found. It doesn't matter. The students that studied hardest learned the most, whether they be at Illinois State or whether they be at Northwestern. The ones who studied the most learned the most. And what they found is it's true regardless of institution for all kinds of students. There's no evidence that students' learning will suffer for attending a less selective college. So we can get that out of the way. So Gallup and Purdue did a study taking a look and comparing all of these schools across the country, and they found there were no statistical differences between public and private universities and elite and non-elite schools on any of their measures. But here's what they said makes a difference. Being able to take a course with a professor who makes learning exciting, working with professors who care about students personally, having a personal relationship, mentor who encourages them to pursue work project several semesters. Maybe it's a research project, maybe it's a project. Participating in an internship that applies classroom learning and being active in extracurricular activities. This is the key, wherever they go. If we want them to be successful, this is how they have a successful college experience. But here's where it gets tricky, because we've been so focused on selectivity. I'll tell you, I guess it's not that easy to find schools that have these experiences. Only 14% of graduates strongly agreed they were supported by professors who cared, made them excited about learning, and encouraged their dreams. Only 6% strongly agreed that they had a meaningful internship or job, worked on a long-term project, and were actively involved in extracurricular activities. Only 3% experienced all 6 factors. So this is where we should be putting our money into figuring out how do we get into those selective schools. All right, so then you can say, all right, but yeah, my kid's going to make more money and going to have a much more successful career if they go to Harvard versus going to Illinois State or Western Illinois or Western Michigan. It's interesting, as I began to take a look at all the people that I worked most closely with and the work of the people who I admired the most, they all had gone to state schools in Illinois. It was interesting. I found it harder to work with people who were less pleasant, actually, to work with people from more elitist colleges. So the 2004 Gallup Purdue annual report found no relationships between college selectivity and both the workplace engagement and general well-being. They aren't any happier in their jobs, whether they go to Harvard or Southern Illinois. But what about the money? So Dale and Kruger, they did a study, and they found that college selectivity had no effect on long-term earnings. What they did was they took a look at students who got accepted to highly selective schools, but stayed home and went to a less selective school, compared to the people who got into highly selective schools and ended up going there. What they found is the same students who were admitted into selective schools, but who chose to attend less selective schools, did just as well financially later on in life. The only caveat for this, they said, is if it is the first time that someone from their family had gone to college, they ended up doing better. So again, interesting, but beware what you hope for. 10 years after graduation, former students of selective colleges report lower job satisfaction than students from less selective colleges. Students from more selective colleges are more likely to feel underpaid. And again, that gets at our sense of worth at our jobs. So what does matter? Well, here's what they say. While some employers might check the name on your college transcript, most care far more about your track record in the field, basic communication and problem-solving skills, and the attitude and work ethic you bring to the table, period. So in summary, job satisfaction, general well-being, learning, and income are all important outcomes of college, and research shows no relationship between selectivity and learning, job satisfaction, or general well-being, period. And so here's the other tricky part, and something for us to be aware of, because I think this happens a lot and is happening more and more. So extreme are the admission standards now that kids who manage to get into elite colleges have, by definition, never experienced anything but success. The prospect of not being successful terrifies them and disorients them. The cost of falling short even temporarily becomes not merely practical, but existential. The result is a violent aversion to risk. You have no margin for error, so you avoid the possibility that you will ever make an error. And here's the thing, as we start to see the mental health crisis, especially in kids in high achieving school districts, we're seeing more and more kids in high achieving school districts in mental health crisis. Part of this is this fragility, this hyper need to do everything perfect, because if I mess up in 4th or 5th or 6th grade, I won't be able to get into the school of my choice. And then I'm not going to be able to get the job that I want to get. And I'll never have the money. I'll be a failure. And this is part of the water that we all drink. And it's certainly part of the water that our kids are drinking. And this is why it can be so problematic. The reality is that students who attend selective schools do not learn more, make more money, or have better careers. All right, our last myth. Self-esteem is essential for children's mental health. So back, I think it was in the 1990s, there were some studies that came out that said kids with self-esteem were much healthier across the board than anybody else. And it made sense to everybody. And so we tried to hack self-esteem, didn't we? And so what we did was we wanted to do everything we could as parents, and I think our generation, the generation before us of parents, really struggle when we see our kid experience any kind of distress, because distress is the opposite of self-esteem. And if they aren't having self-esteem, then they're not going to be healthy. And so we created this self-esteem generation where everybody wins and nobody has to feel bad. And all of a sudden we started propping kids up on a false foundation. And here's the thing, they often talk about the intensive parenting as our response to the need for our kids to have high self-esteem. Mothers and fathers overextend their time and money curating their child's lives in hopes of maximizing the child's future. So this is what we do. We make sure they're on every travel team they could possibly be on, that we get them to Cherry Preschool, and we do the Baby Einstein, and we get them all of these enrichment activities, and we are constantly moving around, and it's hard for them and hard for us. And we also have to constantly supervise them, right? In the past 40 years, American parents, especially those with a college degree, have nearly doubled the amount of time they spend coaching, chauffeuring, tutoring, and otherwise helping their teenage children. And I would say their younger children. This has become another full-time job. Not only do most of us have two job families, but we are also, it's another job trying to get our kids to all of the activities that they have to go to. And so we do play dates. I never had play dates, right? So we have play dates where we're constantly supervising them. We're coaching all of their teams and spending all of this time, right? I like this. I just had to show this. Look at the, a guy took a picture of him as a little leaguer and his son at the same age, both of them 8 years old. Just how different it looks. We actually produced some pretty good baseball players back in the day. And yet, look at how different that is. Our approach to sports has changed a lot. And so here's the thing, our intensive parenting can have unintended consequences. First of all, we feel overwhelmed and anxious. We worry about our kids' success in ways that drive us to be less present. We're constantly having to figure out, is today soccer or is it hockey? Do I need the shoulder pads or do I need the shin pads? What is it? What is it that who's going to get dinner? Who's going to pick up this kid? This is where our energy is instead of spending time as a family. And when we spend this much time with them, we deprive them of a couple of very important things. One is the ability to tolerate discomfort. Because when we see our kid in distress, we go in and we fix it. And the development of a sense of personal competence, their ability to feel like they can be an autonomous, independent person. Roy Baumeister did a study, has done a bunch of studies on this. He said, when we emphasize self-esteem, we can make them feel okay when they should be more worried. Worry is a part of life. There are times when our kids should be worried and then learn how to deal with that. But we also increase their sense of entitlement and reduce their willingness to work hard because we've got it. We're right there. The benefits of not supervising your kid is that they get bored. They have conflict with other kids. They make mistakes that cause a lot of problems, and they fall and they get bruised and they get cuts, right? All of these things. Well, here's what happens. When they get bored and they've got to figure it out on their own, then they figure it out on their own. When they're in conflict on the street and there's not an adult to run in and save them, then they develop the skills to navigate conflict. It's clumsy at first, but then they begin to figure it out together. They make mistakes, and then they figure out and they realize, oh, we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. And I figure out, what do I do after I make a mistake? Well, I got to figure out how to make it right. I can get bruised and know that it's okay. I can get cut and put my own Band-Aid on, all of these things. So here's the thing. There's a ton of research that shows that intensive parenting mainly serves to burn out parents while harming children's sense of confidence in their mental health. There's tons of research that says this, and yet none of us really believe it. In a 2018 survey, 75% of respondents rated these intensive parenting scenarios as good or excellent for their kids and for their families. And less than 40% said the same about scenarios showing non-intensive approach. Part of what happens is when we become anxious and so anxious about their future, our anxiety becomes their anxiety. Anxiety is remarkably contagious. And when we try and insulate them from risk and danger, we're unintentionally transferring our anxiety to them. And that is a burden that I wish that our kids didn't have to carry. And they perceive us. I'm not saying that you are criticizing them, but they perceive us. They see it in your frustration when they come home with a B, or if they haven't done their homework yet. They see it in your face. Perceived parental criticism and unreachable standards predicts child depression. Here's the thing. We all kind of hope that our kid is going to be the A+ kid, right? That's the holy grail. But perfectionism, and perfectionists can ace schools. They do really well in schools, but they don't perform any better than their colleagues once they get to work. Achieving excellence in school often requires mastering old ways of thinking. They are just being compliant. Whereas when you're building an influential career, it demands new ways of thinking, being an innovator. And that's why in some ways, the kids who are so compliant and do everything by the letter are often the ones who struggle to become the innovative leaders in their jobs. It's interesting. Sue Hans was here last week. I don't think she'd mind me telling this story, but one of the things that she said was her son in high school went to a local high school, and he said he kept coming home with B's, and Sue would be like, "What's up with that?" He says, "I'm pretty comfortable living in the house of B." I love that phrase. And here's the thing. He did end up going and getting into the University of Colorado Boulder with B's. And then he just got an agency-wide award, thousands of people, I think, at least hundreds of people. And he was one of the youngest people to get this award. And so he was able to be successful. He didn't have to feel like he needed to follow that perfectionism all that way. And I like this story. Got a 2.4 GPA on my first semester in college, thought maybe I wasn't cut out for engineering. Today, I've landed 2 spacecraft on Mars, and I'm now designing one for the moon. STEM is hard for everyone. Grades ultimately aren't what matter. Curiosity and perseverance matters. These are just some examples of how focusing on the GPA can keep us from being engaged in school and in life beyond school in ways that are much more enriching. In many ways, we've got a culture that is achievement addicted. There's something they call the hedonic treadmill, which is this constant pursuit of achievement. You're constantly trying to achieve the next thing. and it's exhausting. So you go from being, getting straight A's so you can get into your AP classes. And you got to take 5 or 6 AP classes so you can get into a selective college, and you work and you get to the selective college, and then you work your butt off, and then you get to be pre-med at Harvard or Yale or Northwestern. And then you have to do the same thing to get into medical school. And then you've got to get the right residency. And then you've got to get the right, get into the right position in the hospital. And then you've got to become department chair. And then you've got to go to a more prestigious hospital. It just never ends. And it's exhausting. And like a treadmill, you're not going anywhere. Here's the thing. The hedonic treadmill refers to the human tendency to feel a temporary increase in happiness after a positive experience. Hey, I got into Harvard. And then a return to baseline sense of satisfaction afterwards. It only lasts a little bit of time. And so then we say, oh, we need to get A's, straight A's at Harvard. I need to be valedictorian. Then what it does is it starts with this desire, and then we get it. Up that line. We're unhappy people, so that a new desire, and it just doesn't stop. When we chase this achievement, we get nowhere, because there's always something more to achieve. There's always someone more who's got something that we haven't achieved. And we continue to, even though we've achieved, we continue to feel empty and still wanting. We need more money. We need a third house. We need a better vacation. We need this. We need that. I like this quote. My daughter actually shared this quote with me. She said, the hedonic treadmill is like winning a pie eating contest. And the prize is more pie, right? That's what many, many, many of our kids and us as adults are experiencing. So the success or failure becomes a reflection. And one of the things is, when we invest this much in our kids, their success or failure becomes a reflection on us as parents, on how competent we are as parents. And we believe that we should get a good return on our investment. We put all this money, all this time, our kids should be able to achieve. But here's the thing. When we emphasize this self-esteem, we are depriving kids of their most important developmental task, and that is building resilience. Can we focus on how to help them build resilience instead of building self-esteem? Resilience comes from stress. You cannot become resilient without experiencing stress. It's impossible. It's interesting, they created biosphere too, and I like this as a metaphor. The perfect environment for trees. So they had all these trees, and these trees grew, and they grew fast, and they grew tall, and then they kept falling over, and they couldn't figure out why. Here's why. Because there's no wind in biosphere. And what the wind does is the wind pushes and pushes and stresses these trees. So they need to develop bigger root system, and they need to develop different kind of wood within their trunks to be able to withstand that. And then they become taller and stronger. That's the only way they can do it, is they need wind to do it. In the same way, our kids need to experience stress and discomfort in order to learn how to deal with stress and discomfort, so they can deal with the next stress and discomfort next. And I think that this is a real problem for a lot of kids when they need to separate us. Sometimes it happens in middle school. Sometimes it happens when they go off to college. But you've got these kids who mom and dad have been helping them solve their problems all along, but there's this natural pull to separate from them. And then they really struggle. And then all of a sudden you find out these kids are in a partial hospital program, or are considering suicide, or are incredibly anxious, or school refusing. They fall apart, or they go off to college and they just can't make it because they're so just like the biosphere with no wind. They haven't experienced stress to realize, oh, I can overcome this. So what do we do to do this? I like this metaphor by Alison Gopnik. She says, we need to think of parents as gardeners, not carpenters. Intensive parents are carpenters, hammering children into a particular shape, one stroke at a time, so they can make it along that very specific path. Gardening parents pour their labor into creating the preconditions of love, safety, and stability for their kids to grow in potentially unpredictable ways, not knowing what's going to happen for them. But we need to model this for them. What messages are we really sending? It's interesting, 90% of parents report that their top priority for their child is that they're caring, right? That's what we would hope. Take a look at what children are hearing. 81% of children report that their parents value achievement and happiness, their own happiness, over caring for other people. So our kids are getting the wrong message. Why are they getting the wrong message? Because when they say they helped a kid out, we say, oh, that's nice. When they say, when we hear that they got a C on their test, we spend a lot more time talking about it. And we're going to figure out how you're going to catch up. What work are you missing? I'm going to talk to your teacher. We need to figure out how to get this up. Your GPA needs to get up high enough so we can get you into the schools that you want to get into, right? All of these things start happening. It generates all sorts of things that caring activities don't. When they share their cookie with their sibling, we don't spend as much time on that as we do if they trying to get them on the travel baseball team. Adam Grant talked about this when he started observing this in his own kids. When our kids started school, we noticed that many of our questions at the end of the day were about accomplishments, achievements. Did your team win? How did the test go? He said to demonstrate that caring is our value, we realized we needed to give it comparable attention. We started changing our questions at our family dinners. We now ask our children what they did to help others. At first, they'd say, I forget, was the default reply. But after a while, they started giving more and more thoughtful answers. I shared my snack with a friend who didn't have one, for example, or I helped a classmate understand a question she got wrong in a quiz. They'd begun actively looking for opportunities to be helpful and acting on those opportunities. And then can we talk about things that make us anxious? Can we talk about our failures? Can we talk about things we're struggling with, our weaknesses, our insecurities? Because how can we expect our kids to talk about these things if we aren't talking about them? So here's the thing, it's not all or nothing. There are some good things that came out of this intensive parenting. And so what we want to do is we want to move several parenting dials up. We want to keep displaying the love and validating kids' feelings and giving them quality time. But we also want to do some dials down, obsessing over their homework, rescuing them, diving in to rescue them from their distress and to fix their problems for them, to feel responsible when they get bored that we've somehow got to keep and entertain them. Or make sure that they need to be on every possible sports team they can. Solving our children's social problems for them, becoming involved in their social lives, whatever it is. Let's let our kids begin solving their problems as imperfectly as they will, but that's the only way we learn. And then some dials need constant adjusting. How much enrichment activities is too much? What throws the family over the top? How many dinners do we want to have together? Let's make a commitment to how many times we're going to sit down and have dinner together. How much tutoring programs do they need? After a long day of school and then they go to tutoring and then they do their homework? That would be hard for any of us. Many of us work after work and it's exhausting. And we know it's not healthy for us to bring our work home and to be working at night. We're asking our kids who are significantly younger to do the same thing. How many recreational activities are they going to have? How many teams are too many teams? There's got to be a limit somewhere, right? Helping support them in their hard times so they don't become overwhelmed. What we want to do is hit that sweet spot to have them struggle. There are times when we want to jump in and help, but let's let them have that struggle first. Ironically, focusing on caring actually helps kids excel. So children who help others end up achieving more than those who don't. So if we are caught up in this achievement idea, focusing less on the achievement and more on raising kids who are caring gets them there. Boys who are rated as helpful by their kindergarten teachers actually earn more money 30 years later. That's a longitudinal study I wouldn't have guessed. Middle school students who help cooperate and share with their peers also excel compared with unhelpful classmates. They get better grades and standardized test scores. Eighth graders with the greatest academic achievement, moreover, are not the ones who got the best grades 5 years earlier. They were the ones who were rated as most helpful by their third grade classmates and teachers. So all of a sudden, this caring about others helps kids themselves. Middle school kids who believe their parents value being helpful, respectful, and kind over excelling academically, attending a good college, and having a successful career perform better in school and are less likely to break rules. So there you go, right? So this is why the researchers believe this is true. Concern for other people promotes supportive relationships and helps prevent depression. Children who care about others also tend to see their education as preparation for contributing to society, an outlook that inspires them to persist even when things get hard. In adulthood, generous people earn higher incomes, they have better performance reviews, more promotions than their less generous peers. This may be because the meaning they find in helping others leads to a broader learning and deeper relationships, and ultimately to greater creativity and productivity. So this is the mechanism why caring can lead to those things that we're actually hoping for. So when we talk about self-esteem, what's the biggest problem with self-esteem is that it's contingent on success. In some ways, self-esteem, what we've done to try and hack self-esteem, helping our kids feel good about themselves, is to put them on the hedonic treadmill. We have self-esteem when other people think we're attractive and successful, but what happens when we fail? We lose self-esteem. We are also focused on avoiding failure because failure diminishes self-esteem. So what's the alternative? It's cultivating self-compassion, which is a process of being kind to yourself. It's remembering that failing is a part of the human condition, recognizing that we're all imperfect and it's okay to be imperfect. Can I be warm and supportive to myself in the midst of my failure? And so how do we teach self-compassion? We model it. I remember Brene Brown. I know many of you have a wonderful, amazing speaker on vulnerability. I heard her speak one time, and she talked about how she would praise her daughters. Her daughter was an athlete, and she was a soccer athlete. And she says, "I love how strong your body is." And she said, that only went so far because then I watched my daughter's face when I was trying to fit into a pair of jeans that was one size too small. And she saw on my face my shame and disappointment in myself. This is what our kids are seeing. The best way to help our child develop self-compassion is to show compassion for ourselves. And then with them, when they are struggling, can we just be present and avoid the impulse to fix it for them? That's our work. This is what we need to do. We don't need to fix it. We can just let them know we're here. Let them know that that's this sad feeling, this hard feeling, that's going to pass, that all of these feelings, they come in waves. The reality is that instead of self-esteem, we build resilience through modeling self-compassion. We stay present when our child is distressed. That's the work. So the myths: money makes us happy. Elite colleges are the key to success. Self-esteem is essential for wellness. The truth is relationships make us happy, engagement is the key to success, and resilience is essential for wellness. Imagine how things would be different if we realized that we didn't have to build our kids' resume. How would we spend our time? What would we do differently? My guess is we'd spend more time at home. We'd have more meals together. We'd walk the dog together more instead of trying to figure out how we can get something in our mouths so we can get to the next game or the next activity. And I'll just end with this. I like it. I think this is the key to self-compassion. Whenever I get discouraged and want to quit something, I remember the words of my then 3-year-old after she puked carrots all over the living room floor. I'm going to need more carrots. There's self-compassion for you. All right, Joanna, that's what I've got for us today.